Good afternoon, Miss Macha. It seems like the two of us are the only two people at the moment here. Good afternoon, Miss Masuma. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you.
Hello. We will wait for a few more minutes and then, of course, I will announce when we will start. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Welcome to our third session related to KFAS grant writing. Hello, Dr. Weil.
Good afternoon, Dr. Vladimir. How are you?
Afternoon, excellent. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Vladimir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hayden and other colleagues. I'm glad to see you all. Okay, I believe we can start with our activities for today. We will actually make a short summary of the things that we were discussing last time and then, of course, proceed with the process of preparing the KFAS grant application. Before I start, just to confirm whether you can see my screen.
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot. I believe the session is being recorded. Yes, so we are ready to get started. There are a lot of things I would like for us to go through today. Simply, I'm not 100% sure that we will manage to complete all of them. If not, and especially for the final part of today's training related to the technical aspects of submitting the application on KFAS grant management system. If we don't manage to finish everything, I will definitely record another session and simply provide it as a supplementary material along with other recordings in that shared file. And of course, this information will be shared to all faculty members, simply as an option. I'm not 100% sure that this will happen, but simply I would like to emphasize it immediately because there are a lot of things, as you can see, and definitely when it comes to this training this year, this was the first occasion for me to have this training, and definitely I would say that there was a need for one more session, and hopefully in the future we will change that as well. Okay, when it comes to the project application, last time, as you remember, we were discussing this part and we initiated actually the discussion in this part and elaborated some key aspects related to the KFAS project application. I would like to remind us all one more time on the basic structure of the file that you need to prepare and submit on KFAS platform. Later, as I said, we will go to the platform and see how this process is conducted. But from the perspective of that application, you should prepare in PDF as a final document. These are the sections that definitely application needs to have. Abstract, of course, introduction, background, research objectives, research methodology, importance of the research outcomes, anticipated research outcomes, and the references. So one more time, this is the core in terms of the elements that the application must have. And last time we were discussing the first two parts, introduction or the background and research objectives. One more time, I would like to remind you all that I would definitely strongly suggest you to work on abstract when you finish the entire application. This is, in my opinion, the only option that makes sense. So from the perspective of an introduction, I will make a short summary of the things that we discussed last time. Actually, here you need to provide answers to some basic questions. The first one, what is the actual problem that you're tackling with your research proposal? And why is that problem important? Of course, with a special emphasis on Kuwait in regards to KFAS applications. And of course, why is actually your research proposal also important? What is the added value behind your research proposal? And as we were explaining last time, definitely I would suggest you here to use a funnel approach, in which, as we explained last time on that example with persons with disabilities and remote work platforms, you should provide, let's say, a wider background of the problem in terms of those people with physical disabilities. As I was explaining last time, the number of those people worldwide, the number of those people in Kuwait, for example, since I was applying here for KFAS grant, then the fact that those people are facing difficulties in terms of employment inclusion, in terms of poverty, etc. And this is where you actually identify the problem, and then you offer the solution. And then you need to provide a clear explanation how your project proposal, as we were explaining last time, will tackle the problem, at least from one perspective, and what expected outcome eventually will be resulting and will become as a result of this project application that you're working on. So from that perspective, one more time, as it is stated here, and simply I would definitely advise you to use this part as the guidelines in preparing the introduction with a short background. Of course, this is also very important, simply to provide the state of the art, as you were explaining earlier, what actually exists at this moment in regards to scientific literature and the problem that you are tackling, what is the current state of the art, and what you will offer beyond the state of the art as the advance when it comes to your project proposal. So those were the things that we were discussing last time. And of course, as it is stated here, use graphics, educate your reviewer, provide enough information to them, simply make the introductory part easy to understand, use easy language, and give it to your colleagues to read it before you submit it, simply to see whether they understand the point and whether they understand exactly what is the problem that you have identified and that you're trying to tackle with your project proposal. These are some general rules and guidelines when it comes to preparing the introductory part of your project application. One thing I would like to emphasize here, I mentioned last time, simply when it comes to KFAS proposal, you're not requested to provide a literature review as a separate section. In some other funding bodies, simply you are required to provide a literature review as a separate section. Here not, but definitely use the introductory part to provide a background, to provide a literature review, and as I said earlier, the state of the art when it comes to the current knowledge in regards to the topic that you are dealing with in your project application. So that was from the perspective of the introduction. The second thing was and were actually objectives, as we were discussing last time. The core question is very simple here. What are you trying to do? What do you plan to do when it comes to tackling the problem that you have identified? So as I was explaining last time, in our project proposal, we explained that there is a problem in terms of persons with disabilities and their inclusion. and there is a potential solution called remote work. And from that perspective, simply our main objective will be to build mechanisms which will be based on the scientific evidence to increase the level of competencies of those people, persons with disabilities, to take a part in a remote work arrangements and increase their chances to get employment and a regular source of income. That would be the main objective. And as I said earlier, definitely I would advise you here to set one main objective for your proposal. And then on the basis of the main objective to identify and specify those specific objectives for your research. So on the basis of that example, I can say, okay, my ultimate goal is to increase the competencies of persons with disabilities to be able to include in the remote and to simply find employment in the remote work labor market. And to do so and to be able to do so, I need to do certain things. For example, first of all, I need to map the offering of those positions already existing on the virtual labor market in those remote work platforms. And this is going to be one of the objectives that I would set for my research. Then I need to assess the current levels of their competencies in regards to remote work. This is the second. Why? Because to be able to build, I need to assess the current state. Afterwards, I will develop the training program on the basis of this analysis, which will help them to increase and to build their competencies in the area of remote work. And finally, I will assess, after the training, I will assess what are the benefits of that training and whether we have managed to tackle the gap that we have identified in previous stages. So let's say those would be several specific objectives drawn from that main objective that we have identified for our research. And in this manner, simply, it is always a good option to set your specific objectives. Why objectives are important? Not only from the perspective of setting them and making them smart, as we were explaining last time, smart in terms of being specific. So you definitely need to associate them with your overall goal and to specifically address each one of them and to specify what actually you are going to do under each one of them. The second one, they need to be measurable, as we explained last time, meaning that you need to set some deliverables actually that you will deliver as the basis for measure those to measure those objectives. They need to be achievable during the project duration. They need to be relevant for the topic that you're covering, of course, and time bound. You need to specify in which project month you actually expect to achieve this specific objective that you have identified for your project proposal. And this is one aspect of the story, and this is one reason why setting objectives is important. On the other side, when you set your objectives, you should be aware of the very important two other facts which are very relevant for your project application. The first one, your objectives serve as the basis for identifying the tasks or the activities that you need to undertake under your project application. Later on, when we start dealing with the KFAS platform, you will see that there is a part called task schedule. This is actually a Gantt chart in which you should provide a specification of the activities and the duration for every activities during the duration of the entire project. So from this perspective, when the time comes, on the basis of your objectives, you will actually identify those activities. Let me give you one example. As I said earlier, for persons with disabilities, one of our specific objectives was to map the existing offering of remote work positions for those people on, let's say, Freelancer as a platform. Meaning that when the time comes and when I start specifying the activities, I will say one activity, mapping the offering of the remote work platforms. Or, for example, if my activity, my specific objective is to assess the current levels of the remote work competencies of persons with disabilities, that will be the objective. When the time comes, on the basis of that objective, I will say the activity is to developing mechanism, developing questionnaire, let's say, which will serve me as a basis to assess the level of their remote work competencies. So from that perspective, when you set your objectives properly, later on you will use them to identify the activities that you need to undertake, which are definitely a mandatory part of each project application. And when the time comes, I will show you this in the KFAS application platform. But for now, of course, there is a more complex perspective behind all of that for some other funding bodies, which is relevant to something which is called work packages. But I'm not going to extend this story now, simply to avoid confusion and to keep the things simple, because when it comes to KFAS application, at least for now, things are still less complex compared to some other funding bodies. So this is one aspect when it comes to setting the objectives, besides making them smart and besides making them a source of the activities that you will later identify and specify for this project. Also, when it comes to objectives, on the basis of the objectives, you will do the part which is actually the continuation of our talk from last time, and this is the part with setting your methodology. It is a very simple thing here, actually. When it comes to setting the methodology for your project, you have specified some things that you're trying to achieve in your project application by setting the objectives. In part with the methodology, you are required to explain the procedures and techniques that you plan to use to reach those objectives and to accomplish actually those objectives. So this is the relation between objectives, methodology, and finally, as I said earlier, with the activities that you're going to because you need to undertake certain activities to be able, of course, to accomplish those objectives that you set for your proposal. This is very important for you to understand, because those things need to be consistent. You cannot specify one objective and then explain methodology which will be targeting something completely different, and then for that objective, and then identifying the activity again which is completely different. This is inconsistent approach in terms of preparing the application. And what will be the reaction of the reviewer? This is not consistent. Definitely, I will grade it with low score. So from this perspective, one more time, setting the objectives as a foundation for activities later and for methodology, which actually represents an explanation in terms of, as I said, procedures and techniques that you will undertake to achieve those objectives that you have set earlier. When it comes to the research methodology, this is the help text provided by KFAS. As it says, this section is very important, should explicitly explain how the research problems will be tackled. The PI must describe in a logical order exactly what the PI proposes to do, and then must justify the methods chosen appropriate for the specific objectives. The methodology should explicitly address different approaches, designs, procedures, methods that will be used by the applicant to investigate the research problem. To make the things easier, I put here some guidelines when it comes to setting the methodology for your project proposal. Definitely, as it is stated here and as I put it here, with what do you plan to achieve the objectives? Or maybe you can say how you plan to achieve them. What are you going to use to achieve those objectives that you actually identified earlier? So 4 elements are important. The logic of your inquiry in general, whether it is going to be a qualitative one or a quantitative one, or a mixed methods approach, which represents a combination of the two. The research setting, simply to explain what are you going to do. As I said earlier, for those persons with disabilities, in the methodology part, I will say, okay, we are going to prepare a questionnaire. The questionnaire will be based on the following research and some constructs taken from some other authors and the research they conducted. And we will deliver this instrument to the National Association of Persons with Disabilities in Kuwait. And in this way, we will collect the data. When we collect the data, we are going to process them in this and this manner. And as it is stated here, you are required to provide the methods and procedure of data collection, how you plan to collect the data, and of course, methods and procedure of data analysis. Later on, what methods you are going and you plan to use to process the data that you will collect. In my opinion, the level of details that you are going to provide in this part is an indicator of your understanding of the field. Meaning, if you really understand the field that in which you are working and trying to do your research, that means that you are familiar with the methodology that other authors already used for similar purposes, meaning that you will be able to develop your own methodology and to use, of course, those sources. And in these regards, you will show to the reviewer actually that you are familiar with the state of the art in this field. So from that perspective, I would definitely suggest here to be as detailed as possible. And for this purpose, simply I provided here some examples for you to have even better understanding of the things that I'm trying to explain here. So for example, this example number 1, let me open the file. This is actually for one research we did, a KFAS project, which is still active. And of course, we set some objectives here, as I explained earlier. This is introduction. These are the objectives: to map the knowledge, one of the objectives; to formulate the framework; to develop assessment methodology; to assess the level; to conduct a gap analysis. And those were some specific objectives that we have identified. And then when it comes to the methodology, as you can see here, the methodology part has, as you can see here, 2.5 pages. And we were trying to provide as much details as possible regarding the phases that we are going to undertake here. So as you can see, I will zoom in. It says, in initial phase of the project, the comprehensive review of the academic literature will be taken. Okay. In the second phase, a draft proposal needs to be validated using a smaller sample of students in Kuwait and Serbia, etc. And then we specify the things that we plan to undertake here. What is the targeted group? Who are the respondents? Who are the participants actually in our research? What is the targeted area? Which country? What is the sampling method, data collection method? We are going to use experiment. What is the length of that experiment? What is the estimated and expected sample size? And in this regard, simply, of course, we are associating it, as you can see here, with different literature sources, simply to justify why we are using that specific methodological approach to achieve those specific project objectives. So from that perspective, as I said, simply you are providing answers, as it is stated here, to these main 4 elements. Here we have another example, and this is where I would like to show you something else and to emphasize something else which is very important. Just give me a second. This is the example with the persons with disabilities. But as you can see here, of course, we had some specific objectives we set, and I already addressed some of them earlier, so we are not going to repeat them again. But the point is, just give me a second to find, the methodology part. This is the needs analysis, so it must be below. Just a second. Yes, this one. Again, in the methodological part, we are providing explanations. How, I mentioned earlier, one of the specific objectives for our research will be to assess the level of remote work competencies of the persons with disabilities. How we are going to do it? As you can see here, we say, okay, we are going to use the approach of that author who did this and this. And this is where you justify the use of that specific tool that you plan to use for your research. Of course, if possible, we are providing the data regarding the questionnaire. How many parts we will have in a questionnaire? What specific data they will cover and collect, etc. As much details as you provide, better for your application. This is the core conclusion here. And one more thing I would like to emphasize. For example, in this project proposal, besides scientific part, when I say scientific part, it means that we are using a scientific approach to assess the level of competencies of the persons with disabilities. And then we are using the data that we are going to collect from those people to simply publish and to provide some new scientific evidence. And this is all okay. But besides that, we also have a practical component. Practical component will be in creating an online training platform, and we definitely need to build it, and to build some courses which will be focused on building the competencies of those people, meaning that this part should also be explained in your methodology. So definitely, if you have these situations, feel free to provide enough explanation as much as you can at that point, simply because it also represents a part of your methodological approach and the overall approach that you will use to accomplish your objectives, as we said earlier, the ones that you set at the beginning of your proposal. Also here, I would like to share one thing with you. This is something that the reviewers like to see. As we said earlier, Don't be afraid to use graphical representations wherever and whenever applicable. And when simply there's a room for you to do something like this. And definitely with these KFAS grants, there is a room for that. Also, try to quantify everything. I will go back to the quantifying part later with some examples in this regards. For now, when it comes to the methodology, and in order to make your reviewer understand better the steps that you plan to undertake in these regards, you can use something like this, as it is stated here. Feel free to use graphical representation, and this is something I used for one of my project applications. Simply, you can build it, or somebody from your team can build it using some tools, Canva, for example, or something like that. And in these regards, as I said, simply you're making it easier for the reviewer to read the application and to understand the point. So one more time, please be aware of the fact, now we are dealing with methodology here, be aware of the fact that you are wrapping a product that you are trying to sell, as we said many times before, and you need to make the life easier for those who are reading your proposal and to get them interested in really and truly reading the proposal and, of course, evaluating it with high scores when the time comes. So from this perspective, definitely this could be interesting approach in terms of providing a graphical representation of the methodology that you plan to use for these purposes. And that would be the part with the methodology. And one more time, very closely related, this part is with the objectives that you set earlier. Simply here you explain how you plan to achieve those objectives that you have identified. The next thing and the next section in our project application is the part associated with something which is called, as you can see here, importance of the research outcomes. I will go to slideshow just a second. Okay, so this is the help text that KFAS is providing you. This part, usually in some other funding bodies, have several segments. It can be ambitious, for example, or it can be the progress beyond the state of the art, for example. It can be also an impact part. So when it comes to KFAS projects, it is all integrated into one. And this is the reason why in a few minutes, I will give you a few, let's say, advices when it comes to preparing this part for KFAS grants. Simply some things that, in my opinion, definitely should be covered here. And I'm going to show you some examples how you can do it in a very easy manner for you to prepare and for those who are reading it to understand. Before that, as you can see here, let us read the help text the KFAS is providing us here. It says, the importance of the research outcomes. The applicant should clearly state the benefits of conducting the proposed research. This will include a discussion on how the proposed research will advance scientific discovery and understanding. This will also include how the research will benefit individuals, organizations, and the state of Kuwait. This is specifically for the KFAS. And of course, in all other circumstances, depending on the funding body, you will definitely need to provide the evidence that your research is important for that country, for that region, or whatever is actually the, let's say, geographic location that you're targeting with your research. When it comes to the elements that should be, in my opinion, included in this part, as I said earlier, there are three things I would like to discuss here. The first one, of course, would be the scientific perspective. As it is stated here in this help text from KFAS, it says discussion of how the proposed research will advance scientific discovery. And this part is closely, very, very, very closely related to that added value or value proposition I was mentioning earlier. If you remember last time when we were discussing the introduction, we said in introduction, you need to specify the problem, potential solution, and how your project proposal will actually tackle the problem and what is the added value that you are bringing with your research. So this is the first part where you need to specify the added value of your research, introduction. The second mandatory part where you need to explain it and provide enough details regarding it is definitely the part with the importance of the research outcomes. As I said, with some other funding authorities, it is defined differently, but in general, the point is the same. When it comes to the scientific perspective, one more time, you have provided the data earlier in that introductory part regarding the state of the art. You can briefly here do it the same, not the same text, of course, but you can provide the actual snapshot of the state of the art in the field that you are tackling with your project proposal. And you need to provide here a clear explanation of the advances that you are offering with your project proposal, which are beyond the state of the art. This is the added value that you are providing. You can do it in many ways. You can simply write 2 or 3 paragraphs of text and that's it. I wanted to show you one way to do it, which is again easier for you to prepare, and on the other side, for those who are reading, they will more easily understand the point. Very simple thing is here in question, as you can see, a tabular example. Just give me a second to load this image. And this is it. By doing this way, you simply should have 2 columns. The first one saying, as it is stated here, state of the art. And it says, different competence frameworks exist. No framework for digital entrepreneurial competencies exists up to date. And then beyond, this project will systematize the knowledge, etc., and will generate the framework which will be used later to assess digital entrepreneurial competencies. So it is very clearly stated and obvious what is happening at the moment and what your project proposal is offering as an added value. So definitely, if you have more of these things, as you can see here, and definitely I'm not going to go through the details of these things, they will be available for all of you to analyze them and to see how you can do something similar for your research. Definitely, I would advise this, as I said last time, and this is an obvious thing. These things that we are discussing here are very closely related to preparing a paper for journal and for the conference. Again, you always need to identify and specify what is the value that your research provides. As we said earlier, when it comes to the papers, you already have the results and everything is clear. Here, when it comes to preparing a project application, you don't have the results. These are the things that you plan to do, and these are the things definitely which are associated with earlier specified the specific objectives for your research. But in a sense of displaying it and showing it to the reviewers in terms of the current state and the advance, this is the way how I would definitely suggest you to do so. Of course, as I said, you can do it in many ways. You can put it as a paragraph, 2 or 3 paragraphs of text. This is not that important. It is easier to track it this way, but the core thing is to have it. If you don't have it, and if it is not obvious what is the added value from your research and what the funder and the state and other stakeholders will receive as a benefit from your research, the chances for your research to get funded are pretty low. And that would be the scientific perspective. The second thing which is important here is related to the practical perspective of your research, if this is applicable. I'm sure that you remember that earlier when we were showing that call for proposals, by KFAS, we saw that there are 3 types of research projects they are funding: basic research, applied research, and for young researchers. When it comes to applied research, they will definitely, and I'm sure that there is somewhere in the KFAS instructions, there is a note saying that that research which has a practical implication will have more chances of getting approved. So from this perspective, simply they are trying to also motivate researchers to conduct applied research. And from this perspective, if you have the applied element in your research, definitely it makes sense. But not only from the applied perspective, this is a mandatory part actually for other funding bodies when it comes to the impact of your project. You will definitely have it even if you are doing a basic research. But from the perspective of the things that we are discussing here and to associate them with the KFAS application, seems it is a bit different compared to other funding bodies. I would definitely advise you to do something like this. And this is where, again, quantifying becomes important, in my opinion. So as you can see here, this is the table in which, for one of my projects, I have identified key stakeholders or target groups for this research. Definitely, these are persons with disabilities we mentioned earlier, but are there any other stakeholders and interest groups who will benefit from this research? Definitely always are. So in this regards, you need to specify them as well. So as you can see here, the scientists, definitely there is an impact on the scientific community internally on the level of AU and our collaboration, maybe with some other people from abroad, and of course, maybe for the entire scientific community in one country, for example. Also, besides that, there is always an interest, socioeconomic impact, actually, the impact on policy making, government, as you can see here, general public, etc. And in this way, simply you have identified some groups which will be impacted by your project. There are, of course, many ways you can display the data in these regards, but imagine the situation that you're trying to explain all these things presented here in details in some text. Definitely you will need at least I would say at least 2 pages of text to explain these things. And in this matter, you're making a life complicated for those who are assessing your proposal. Simply, definitely, I would expect you to agree that this is a better way of doing so. So here, you will specify, as it is stated here, short-term impact, mid-term impact, long-term impact. And then you will say whether the type of impact is direct or indirect, and what is the level of the impact that you assess from your perspective. And then the timeline, whether your impact occurs during the project application, during the project realization, sorry, or maybe during and after, because definitely there's a part of every project which is called sustainability of the project. So from that perspective, you are expected with your research to provide an impact even after the realization of the project. So in this manner, you can put these data in the table and simply quantify them, as I said earlier. And then at the end, or maybe in between these tables, this is a matter of your selection, you will provide relevant explanations in these regards. And for example, I'm not sure whether this is the case here for this project application, but for some others, I say, for example, there will be an impact on the scientific community in terms that the members of our team will benefit from publishing more, we will have more results, we will have more citation eventually, our H indexes will be higher, etc. And this is all okay. But the good thing here is to, for example, calculate those data for your team members. You can, for example, take their Google Scholar profiles, calculate the number of citations on average per every member, not per team, sorry, calculate the number of published papers for you as a team in, let's say, last 2 years, and calculate the H index for the members of your team. And then you can make a projection saying the impact of this project will be, for example, we had 3 published papers in, this is too few. Let's say 5 published papers in the last 2 years. And then as a team, we plan to have 7 published papers. And this is how you quantify and make a projection. This is definitely not the data that you already have. Simply you're making a projection in terms of the impact. Because when it comes to impact, you will never have the data of the actual impact. You simply want to show that your research will have the impact on different stakeholders. Of course, you can do these things where applicable. Maybe in some cases you won't be able to quantify the data, but certainly you will be able to provide enough details for the reviewer to understand what are the expected impacts of your project proposal. So I'm not going to go through these elements here in table. This is, I would say, not a rational thing for us to do. Simply, they will also be available here. So for those who want to do something similar, maybe in the future, or already you're working on it, or have something similar, of course, you're free to read it and analyze it. And of course, if you have any questions and comments in this regards for me in the future, I will be more than willing to discuss them and to analyze them together. So this is the part with the implication and the impact part of your project, because as I said, those elements that we stated earlier are the mandatory elements existing in the application. Besides that, simply it's a matter of your creativity and decision in the final instance to see and to select the elements that you plan to put. And definitely the third criteria that should be definitely also addressed here is the relevance? In these regards for Kuwait, because we are discussing here KFAS applications, but for some future applications with some external bodies, relevance for that specific region, for that funding body, maybe for the targeted group of people, etc. So when it comes to the KFAS and when it comes to strategic documents, I'm sure and I know that earlier when we were discussing the objective of your research, I told you, please try to associate and to provide an alignment between your main objective and some strategic documents existing on the level of that country or region or whatever. In case of Kuwait, for example, I put here a link. We are not going to open the link, but the core idea is to try to provide the evidence that your research is actually aligned, let's say, with Kuwait 2035 vision. You can also analyze other strategic documents, of course, depending on the specific area that you are targeting. If it is education, you will analyze some strategies in terms of education, for example. If it is, I don't know, green economy, in terms of green economy. But the idea is to make an association, and in this part, to simply put two or three sentences explaining how your research is relevant in terms of the country and some strategic documents existing on the level of the country. So from the perspective of the importance of the research outcomes, that would be the core idea, and those would be the core guidelines for those working on preparing this part. Scientific perspective is a must. Everything is actually a must here, but I would start with scientific perspective and development beyond the state of the art. Practical perspective in terms of impact and the implications of your research and relevance for in this case, for Kuwait and some strategic documents and the connection, of course, with your research with those things. And finally, the final part, besides references, of course, and abstract of the project application, let's say the core part of our application, will be dedicated to anticipated research outcomes. This is the part where you are simply required, and there is a help text provided here by KFAS, but this is a rational thing to say and to explain. You are required to specify the anticipated research outcomes of your research. In this part, of course, you are required to provide the data on your plans in regards to publishing in conferences or presenting actually in conferences and publishing in conference proceedings, maybe book chapters, maybe journals, of course. And I would definitely advise here to try to specify the conferences and to specify the journals that you plan to submit your work later when the time comes. Why is this a good strategy? Because in this way, we are again showing to the reviewer that you actually know everything that you need to know in regards to your research in this phase already when you're preparing research. So definitely later on, you will submit a paper, maybe it will be get rejected. Of course, you're not bounded to publish in that specific journal, but simply here, and you can say it, targeted conferences and targeted journals are these ones. And you need to specify them. This is the core idea, of course. On the other side, something which is very important here, the research profile of your team. You must be realistic here. People often tend to impress others who are reading their proposals by saying, okay, we have a project application, and the project will last for, let's say, 2 years. And in 2 years, we plan to publish 10 papers. This is all okay. But the question is, for the reviewer, he or she can very easily check the research profile of you as a PI and of your team members. And if they check, let's say, your Google Scholar profiles, let's say, as an example, then they see that the whole team published 2 papers in last 5 years, how can you convince them that you will publish 10 papers in the following 2 years? So in these regards, please be aware of the research profile of your team. Simply check those data for the whole team, see what is realistic and what is not realistic. It is always a good strategy here to estimate rationally and realistically don't overestimate, because that can have a negative impact on your application later. And you can receive negative points on that. And simply reviewer will say, sorry, I checked one of the things that you're submitting with your application is also your CV. So they don't need to use even the Google Scholar. They have a CV, and in your CV, they will see the number of publications that you had in previous 5 years. And in these regards, they will be able to understand better whether this output that you're selecting and provided here is actually realistic or not. So from that perspective, if we know that the reviewers will do something like that, please, we need to make sure that we do it initially on our side properly and plan it properly. And one thing I would like to add here, in my opinion, very important, besides research outcomes, although this part is called anticipated research outcomes, you can also have things which are not publications, but which are also the outcome, research outcome actually of your project. For example, you can have a data set. Imagine the situation that you are conducting a research and you have, I don't know, 2,000 respondents, for example, or 1,000. This is a huge data set. And of course, there are ways you can deposit that data set and make it available to the others. For those who are not familiar, when you submit a paper, you're always required to specify whether you have already deposited your data set somewhere, or your data will be available upon request, or if not available, you need to explain why. So from this perspective, there are journals as well where you can publish actually a data set. So from this perspective, a data set can also be a valid research outcome of your research. You may have a report with the practical implications for somebody. For example, for those people with the disabilities, definitely this is also a result. One of our projects, the result for it was an online tool that we have created with the help, of course, of programmers and designers. And this is absolutely valid outcome of that project. And definitely, if we plan to do it, definitely this is the place where you need to specify it and have it also mentioned. In this part, as it is stated here, it says the connection with objectives. If you remember last time when we were discussing objectives, I said something very important there. For every objective, this is not a mandatory thing, but if you want to increase the chances for your application to be successful, I think it makes sense to use it. Even though I didn't use it in some of my applications, simply I make those decisions along the way. And this is a matter of your assessment in a final instance. But it makes sense to do for the objectives part, to make them smart, to say in which project month you plan to achieve it, and what will be the mean of verification for that specific objective. Actually, what will be a deliverable or the output that you will use as for the purpose of measuring the level of completitiveness of that specific objective. So when the time comes, when you prepare this part, simply you can say there are other deliverables that we plan besides papers, and on the basis of those things you did, you can specify them here as well. So this is also one thing I would like to add regarding anticipated research outcomes. This is not a rocket science, but it is important to emphasize, as I said, that you need to take a research profile of your team into consideration. This is very important, and to provide simply a list of the targeting conferences and journals that you plan to target with your research and with your actually with the results when the time comes. And other deliverables, if you have them and if you specify them under your objectives, definitely they're also more than welcome when it comes to specifying them in this part of your project application. So in this manner, we definitely covered all sections and all aspects of the project application. My idea simply was to discuss those sections and to give you some guidelines in terms of making those applications successful, more successful, and simply making them more appealing to those who will read your application and who will evaluate your application earlier. As he said earlier, before you start, one of the things I would definitely advise you again, try to think about those who are reading the application. At some point, somebody will read it. It is not still going to be, I don't know, ChatGPT or something. but still there are humans who are reading it. So in these regards, you are wrapping a product in this case, which is called a project application for those people. They need to recognize the value of your research clearly and to see that you are capable of delivering actually that project and the results that you have specified over there, and of course achieving those specific objectives that you have identified. So when it comes to key takeaways, as a short summary before we proceed to this technical part of the application, one more time, clearly identify value propositions. When I say value propositions, this is a term from marketing. Added value, the things that you bring beyond the state of the art. First of all, do it for yourself, because you need to clearly emphasize them in your application. As we said earlier, primarily in introduction, when it comes to KFAS, introduction part, and the part with the significance of the research outcomes. This is where you need to specify them and emphasize them as much as possible. But first of all, you need to be clearly aware of them, what is actually the new value and that advance beyond of the state of the art that you're bringing. Wrap up your proposal professionally. You're selling it to the end users, as we were explaining earlier. It is not important only to prepare a good text. Definitely, this is the most important part. If your, as I said earlier, introduction is not associated with your methodology, objectives, and everything else, definitely this is not going to be assessed properly from the evaluators. But besides textual content, make sure, as we said earlier, and feel free to use graphical representations, to use tables, to quantify as much as possible, because in this way, simply you are showing to the reviewers that you know the things that you are explaining and proposing here, and simply you're convincing them that you are capable, of course, you and your team, of doing and completing this project. So this is exactly one of the things I emphasized here. Show the team that that your team is capable of completing the project, not only from the perspective of the references for you and your team. Of course, this is very important. You need to have some connection in your research with the things that you're applying for. But also, not only from that perspective, also from the perspective how you actually wrapped this project application in terms of using those elements I stated earlier. As we said last time, in my opinion, definitely this is true. The first 1-2 pages are the most important, actually, that introductory part. This is where you grab the attention of the evaluator. This is where you need to get them interested in the topic and willing to read it in a matter of, I don't know, some limited time frame. Use smart approach for setting the objectives. We already discussed this part earlier, so definitely try to quantify. Again, this is a matter of your selection and decision, but this is a good approach, not only for KFAS. This is the reason why I put it here, because you can apply it in other applications as well. Provide as much details for the methodology as possible, as I was explaining earlier. In this way, you show to the reviewers that you actually know the things that you are writing and proposing here as a research. Explain properly the importance of your research and advances beyond the state of the art. We were discussing it a few minutes ago. So those 3 elements should be definitely covered in this part. And be realistic when it comes to anticipated research output for your research proposal. And from the perspective of preparing the basic application that will be uploaded later on a KFAS portal, definitely this would be it. Now we can proceed to the technical part of your application. Before we do so, please, I will be more than happy to discuss if there are any questions or comments or suggestions regarding the previous part, and in the meantime to take some water. All clear? Okay, I'm more than happy to see that everything is okay. And hopefully we will measure it when the time comes to the number of applications we won as a team. Can I proceed to the technical part? Can you hear me, please? Can anybody confirm something? And now we are like the students.
Thanks, Dr.
Yes, of course we can hear you. Thank you, Dr. Vladimir.
Okay. Okay, now the technical part of the story. Just give me a second to go back. Yeah. When you have your application ready, you have it as a PDF document. The next step is, of course, to submit it on KFAS management system. This is the link for the KFAS management system. When you click on the link, you will be prompted to, just a second, I already have it open here, so we can use that link. Yeah, you will be here, and this is the portal for those who didn't have the chance to see it. You are required, when you initially log in here, you are required to register. And after you register, I will explain this part in more details in several minutes. After you register, you will definitely be able to see this central dashboard. And here, as you can see here, these are my applications, the applications I did in the past 2 years. And here's the data regarding those which were accepted, which are funded, which are in finalization, under review, and one of them was rejected, as I explained earlier. Simply it was out of scope. And this is where, one more time, I would like to emphasize to plan your topic very carefully when it comes to KFAS project applications, and try to align it actually with the thematic areas and priorities which are identified in KFAS call. Before I proceed, because it would be definitely irrational for us to lose time in those technical things related to registering here on KFAS application system and everything else. There is a tutorial, as you can see here, and it will be available. I will definitely share this file. There is a tutorial provided by KFAS, which provides a step-by-step guidance in terms of registering and using the application system. So from that perspective, definitely I would say there is no need for us to go through these things. Simply now, I would like to show you something else. I would like to show you how you can actually prepare your application and what are the elements that you are required in terms of the data on the KFAS application system. So this is one application I have initiated a few days ago, simply to be able to show you this part. As I said, all those technical things are available in terms of starting application, everything else in that tutorial. So you're not going to waste any more time with this, but this is how the application looks like on the KFAS project application system. The first thing, as you can see here, after you accept terms and conditions, it is marked in green. And the first thing, everything you complete here as a section will definitely be marked in green. So this is an indicator for you that you have. Sorry? Sorry. Somebody has unmuted. Just a second. Okay. So these are the sections, as I said. As soon as you complete each one of them, you will receive a notification here on the left when you validate it that it is completed. The first one is related to you as the applicant and your data, so there is no reason here to waste any further time. The classification, this is important. Have you applied for a KFAS research grant before? Of course, yes, no. Have you received a PhD in the last 3 years? This is because we said earlier there is a young researcher grant as well, so this is important for them to be eligible to participate, of course. Research domain, as we said earlier, this part is important. Here you will select one of those domains that you are applying for, of course, as per the call that we have all received from KFAS. So, for example, I usually go with digital transformation. Then you should specify the research area here. Simply, there is an option here to add those research areas and to search the base and to provide some keywords for your application. Is your research interdisciplinary? Is the research sectoral, and the type of collaboration. Definitely, this is something that KFAS emphasizes and welcomes, the collaboration in international institutions. So if you are collaborating with somebody, definitely you should specify it here, whether this is a local, regional, international, local, regional, local, international collaboration, because you can have multiple partners. And briefly, you should explain here the nature of the collaboration. What is the core idea here? Simply to explain how the collaboration with some local institutions or some foreign institutions can benefit your application. For example, when you collaborate with local institutions, they can help you in terms of collecting the data for your research. For example, when you collaborate with some international institutions, definitely you can use maybe some of their capacities in terms of some laboratories, equipment, or whatever. So in this regard, simply you are required here to explain briefly what is the type of this collaboration with your external collaborators. Then we have the part here, which is more scientifically based, let's say, but this part was also definitely important. But here, research proposal information. You need to provide the title of the research proposal. You need to provide the title in Arabic as well. This is the part where you will provide the abstract in English and Arabic. As we said earlier, abstract is definitely going to be a part of your main document I specified earlier, the part with the duration and the part with the budget for your project application. And it says here, can this project be considered a continuation of any other project funded by KFAS? I was explaining this part earlier, if you recall, on that first session we had, and I said definitely it makes sense to think in terms of extensions of research. So you did one phase, and then if there is a potential for you to extend your research, maybe by including more participants from different countries, for example, or involving something new into your research as a second stage, definitely you are eligible to do so and you're welcome to do so, but you need to specify here if already this was a project funded already by KFAS. In this part, as you can see here, this is the part which is very closely related to the document that we have explained earlier, and we need to prepare before we come to this part. One more time, before I proceed, I would like to emphasize here the fact that please don't start with this application submission system. This is the last phase of your work in terms of submitting the application. The first phase definitely should be, and the main phase actually, should be related to preparing that application in the document that we have specified earlier with those sections which will be available in that document. Because on the basis of that application, you will use the relevant data and provide them here. This is the core idea. So when it comes to this part, this is interesting. You are not required specifically to identify the hypothesis of your research in that main document. You can do it, of course, if you want. You can set it as research questions and then convert it to hypothesis here. But definitely, you are required on a KFAS application system here. You're required to provide the data on your one general hypothesis that you have for your research. Or if you have them more, of course, you will provide them. But you can put one general, let's say, simply by converting. If you remember when we were discussing main objective of the research, you can simply convert that main objective into hypothesis. And for example, you can say the hypothesis is that persons with disabilities will their competencies will be increased through the process of focused training in regards to digital marketing, for example, and they will be impacted by their socioeconomic characteristics, for example. That could be an example of how you can convert an objective into hypothesis, because I believe that definitely most of the colleagues are familiar, but for some maybe who are less experienced, the point of hypothesis is to make it a testable statement, something that you will later test through your research and simply confirm whether the level of I don't know, persons with disabilities competencies is associated with their socioeconomic characteristics or not, for example. So this is the part with the hypothesis. When it comes to the research objectives, simply here you need to copy and paste from your main document the specific objectives that you have set for your research. Then proposed research outcomes and potential impact. We were discussing this part earlier. Definitely those two elements and those two parts are already a part of your application. Simply extract the data here, and I tend to simply copy from there and paste it here. Of course, when it comes to the impact, unfortunately, you cannot paste those tables that you may generate in the file I showed you earlier, but you can make a description. Even now, with more text, simply providing more information regarding the impact of those of your research on those targeted groups that you have specified and identified actually for your research. When it comes to proposal, this is where you're uploading the file. As I said earlier, when you finish preparing your application, it will be in PDF. Here you will upload it, and that would be it regarding this part. And finally, it says here, write briefly in 2 lines, expected results for policymakers, media, and interest groups. This is also a part where you can use the part with the impact that you have specified earlier for your project, and simply, again, briefly explain the expected impact of your research to policymakers, media, and any other relevant stakeholders that you have identified in that part. So from this perspective, definitely it makes a lot of sense to make this part, I think, yes, to make this part with the expected impact, for example, like this, and to put it in your application as a document. And later on, you have also here some text that you can provide as an explanation for the table in the application, or you can simply write it down again here in these relevant fields which are available here in the application system, as you can see. But again, these are technical things. This is something that you will simply collect from your application and put here, nothing else. This part is also very important, and this is actually very time-consuming part. It says research supplementary information and documents. As I told you earlier, my first application for KFAS was in 2020. And as of that time, I noticed something interesting, that they are gradually increasing the requirements when it comes to their application. As far as I remember, maybe I'm wrong, but I would say that in that first year, the only supplementary document they were asking for was data management system. The data management plan. All others were introduced actually in 2021, if I'm not wrong. So definitely at this point, there are some supplementary materials you are required to provide. And this is also very important part of your project application, because evaluators or reviewers, they're also evaluating this part as well. And this part should also be prepared as per certain criteria. So here there are 4 elements and 4 documents, as I was saying earlier. The first one is related to ethical approval. I will open here the file. This is something that exists as a template. Simply contact Dr. Khalil when you prepare your project application. He will send you a template, and this is how this template looks like. Again, here you are entering the data. Of course, if your research is associated with humans, animals, I'm not sure whether plants also count, to be honest, but definitely in these cases you're required to provide this ethical approval. So from that perspective, especially if you're dealing with humans, so which is relevant definitely for us as a College of Business mostly. For other colleagues, simply it's a better way to, a good way to simply, good advice to check for this ethical approval for other situations. But the core thing is to simply provide enough information here, how you plan to conduct your research, and you actually copy the data again here from your application. So definitely it is an easy thing to do when you have everything already ready, and when you have the final file, definitely you will put the data, you will mark those fields which are applicable for your application. You will submit it to Scientific Research Center, because this is a mandatory part of your application, and you are required to provide an ethical approval as a supplementary file, as I was showing earlier here on KFAS application system. The next thing is something that is very important, again, for the perspective of project application: data management plan. The core idea here is to explain actually data description and collection, explain what data you plan to collect, and to explain the data, their formats and everything else, how you will preserve those data, what will be the procedures in terms of accessing those data later, copying them, saving them, are you going to use some repository for these purposes, etc. To be honest with you, on the first year when I was applying for a KFAS grant, they didn't have this document. They only had the instruction to prepare it, and I did it. And afterwards, they told me they will accept it as a template actually for the KFAS. So in these regards, later on, Dr. Khalil and myself decided to simply share it with our faculty members who are submitting KFAS proposals to use it as a template for preparing this data management system. And definitely for all these supplementary materials, please contact Dr. Khalil or myself directly, and I will give you the templates and examples of these supplementary materials. Trust me, this will make your life much easier when it comes to preparing these supplementary materials, because if you develop them from scratch, it can be a very time-consuming activity. When it comes to the dissemination plan, this is also one of the things that your application must have. What is the idea with the dissemination plan? You will have some results out of your project, and you will communicate those results with your general public, of course, and with your with those interested groups in your and stakeholders, let's say, in your research. So from that perspective, again, in this plan, you are required to provide a specification of the tools and the channels that you will use to promote your project. Of course, these are only some ideas. The list is endless. You can, I don't know, you can use a podcast, for example, for these purposes. You can use many, many different things. But these are some examples I put here for one of my previous project applications. And one of the things which is a regular thing in these regards is, let's say, a project website. And then you can specify what elements your website will have. And the important things, and this is where I'm going back to the quantifying everything. It is an important thing to show to the evaluators that you will actually monitor the success of your dissemination plan when the time comes. In more complex projects, you will definitely be required to have a person who will be dedicated to communications, a scientific communication officer who will be working with these things and communication in general. But for less complex projects such as KFAS, this is more than enough. But definitely it is a good strategy, again, to provide some metric, as it is stated here. For the websites, for example, on a monthly basis, if we have more than 300 visits, this means that we definitely are on the right track. A good one between 100 and 300, and poor below 100 means that we need to do something to increase. And of course, you can monitor these things. For those colleagues who are familiar with digital marketing, you can use Google Analytics, for example, to simply measure the number of visits to your website. And in this way, as I said, nobody will check later whether you are doing these things or not. But it is a good thing for you tomorrow to simply bring the publicity to your research and to monitor these things in order to see whether this is a success or not. This is not a mandatory thing. For example, for my KFAS grants, I didn't use this option, but as I said, it's up to you what channels you will use, and depending on the channels, you will provide a list, as you can see here, who is the targeted group that you are actually targeting here, short description of this activity, and some metric. And for example, as you can see here, I plan to use newsletters, mailing lists, social network profiles, of course, LinkedIn, for example. And again, for everything, we have some ResearchGate also can be an interesting option. We have for everything some success metric that can be used. Project fact sheet, for example, you can create a fact sheet from time to time, simply providing with some basic information about the project, about the results, and simply share it with the members of the community and the general public, etc. Press releases, internal seminars. This is something in European Research Night, simply an event in which you can participate and present your research. Of course, scientific publications. This is the part that we mentioned earlier when it comes to research outcomes. And for example, for this project, as you can see, I put here a note: targeted peer-reviewed journals will be determined during project realization. This is one approach. As I said earlier, the other would be to specify the names. Again, this is a matter of your decision and selection in a given circumstances. But the point with the dissemination plan, to simply put it in a nutshell, is to provide the information regarding the channels that you will use to promote your project and the metrics that you can use later to track the success of your dissemination plan. Again, you can say, okay, I don't need this. Nobody will look for it. But again, as I said earlier, I have a feeling that gradually the competition when it comes to KFAS grants is increasing. The direct consequence of the increase of competition in these regards will be simply a lower acceptance rate, first of all, and higher requirements in terms of applications. So from that perspective, definitely it is very important to prepare these things in a professional manner, because again, you are showing in this manner to those people who are evaluating your proposal that you can do it really properly yourself, of course, and your team. And the final element is related to, not element, risk management plan. This is the final supplementary material that you are required to submit. This is also an example. Simply every project, not only scientific, everything that we do is actually associated with some risks. And when it comes to scientific projects and project applications, the core idea here is very simple. The idea is to provide this risk management plan and to show to the reviewers that we are able to identify core risks associated with the realization of this project, and that we have some contingency plans for those things, for those situations. So as you can see here, for example, methodology risk, description of the risk says inadequate sampling strategy, action to use different sampling. This is a low when it comes to the risk level, low level of occurrence. But on the other side, associations of people with disabilities unwilling to cooperate in terms of their members participating in the research. So maybe, and definitely this is a medium, at least medium risk when it comes to conducting research. And you can use some personal contacts as a way to overcome this issue. And you know it yourself, very often the things end up with those personal contacts that we all have in terms of collecting the data and overcoming this risk. But in this manner, simply you show to the evaluators and the reviewers that you understand those risks, that you are aware of them, and that you have strategies to overcome those risks associated, of course, with the realization of your project application. So this is also a supplementary file, which is, as I said earlier, also required as a mandatory file here in this part related to supplementary materials that you need to provide in this part of your project application. Besides those basic supplementary files, there are a few more things, actually one important at this stage, which is related to project team CVs. This is important for those who plan to submit their applications. Earlier, this is also one indicator that simply KFAS is increasing the requirements. In 2020, when I was applying for the first time, when I asked whether there is a template for the CV, they told me, no, you can use whatever CV template you have. But last year, definitely they have introduced their template, meaning that they are gradually, as I said earlier, simply increasing the requirements. So this is a template for the curriculum vitae of each, for the PI, of course, and of course for each team member. And as I said earlier, this is where you will specify your publications in the past, your participation in research. Also, they are expecting you here to provide the data regarding the research impact, etc. So in the very easy manner, when the time comes, they will be able to assess whether your team is capable of doing this research. This is the first thing, and to assess whether your anticipated research outcome is, that we mentioned earlier, is actually realistic or not. And let me go back to the application. This is where you need to specify your co-investigators, whether you will have some consultants, of course, as well. You specify them all, and when you select and when you enter them here, you're required to enter their names, affiliation, and everything else. So you simply will follow the info you have here. Of course, as I said earlier, I would definitely suggest here, when it comes to entering the data on your team members, please don't wait for this part to select your team members. Select your team members in advance. As we said, before you start working on your proposal, create a team of people who have different competencies and who will be capable of delivering this project as a final result. And when it comes to this part, task schedule, sorry, just a second, because I selected something I need to write. This is the part with the task schedule. As you remember earlier, when I was explaining the part with the objectives, I said setting the objectives, and this is where I would like to repeat it one more time because it is very important. Setting the objectives is extremely important because, first of all, you are explaining what are you going to do in your research. The second thing, and what is the target, what is your aim in your research, the main one and the specific ones. And then on the basis of the objective, later on, you will work on providing explanations for your methodology. And also, you will provide the data when the time comes for the task schedule. This part of project application for some other funding authorities, for example, in Europe, is extremely complex. Because besides this task schedule, you are also required to provide deliverables for every phase in your research. I would put it this way. Better construction will be forever work package, but this is something else. And you need to provide so-called milestones, simply the points in time where you will measure the success of those activities. You don't have it. We still don't have it for the KFAS grants. For KFAS grants, you only need to have and to add the tasks, or actually the activities that you will undertake to achieve your objectives. And this is where, one more time, you will go back to your objectives. And as I said earlier, I will give and repeat actually that example I gave earlier. One objective of our research for the persons with disabilities was to, let's say, assess the level of remote work competencies of the persons with disabilities. This is the objective. When we reach the part with the tasks that we need to undertake to fulfill this objective, I will say developing questionnaire for the purpose of assessment. That could be one task. The other task, applying questionnaire on a sample of people with disabilities to assess their competencies. So from that perspective, it is not always one objective, one task. Definitely, this is a common sense. Analyze the objective that you have and identify the tasks that you need to undertake to fulfill the objective. This is the core idea. When you have the tasks, and these are specific things that you need to do, things are very easy after that. You come here and you say add, and for example, task name will be assessing, for example. And here you need to specify a duration. This is why this part is important. And it needs to be aligned with your objective. This is also very important. You remember when I said, when you specify the objectives, please bound them in terms of time and say, in month 20, we will fulfill this objective. Now, when you define the tasks which are relevant for that objective, and definitely which address the specific objective, you will say, for example, start date for this activity will be, I don't know, month number 3, and we will finish, let's say, by month number 7. And I will click here on save. And the moment you do so, as you can see here, the Gantt chart is being created, and those project months are highlighted here. And later on, this is a plan of your activities. This is actually, these are the things that you will undertake during the realization of the project to fulfill all the objectives and to have research outputs that you have intended for your research. And this is why this part is extremely important. Please do it properly. Please dedicate some time to it. It is not only a matter of putting some data. Organize them. For example, when I say organize them, put those activities and those tasks which are associated to objective number 1, for example, and then put them all one after another. Then focus on objective number 2, objective number 3, and so on. And make sure that this time frame that you define here makes sense. Simply from the perspective of the activities that will be conducted, and those activities should be distributed over the entire length of your project. So if you have a 24 months project, you need to have activities in every 24 months. And the final thing I would like to add here, in general, again, this is a matter of your decision, but one general rule when it comes to preparing Gantt charts for the project applications is that you should have two activities by default set. The first one is project management, because you as PI need to have a good project management during the whole realization of the project. And you will put for the project management starting date, starting month number 1 and month 24. And that's it, if it is a 2-year project. This is by default. And the second default activity or task here will be dissemination. Again, it's a matter of your decision whether you will put to disseminate from month 1. I tend to put it, let's say, from month 6 or 8 when I have something to disseminate. Before that, okay, you can do things, you can prepare a website or something like that, but again, you need the content for that. So from that perspective, it is a matter of your decision. But I would say that those two tasks or activities should be definitely put by default in any case. All other tasks are definitely associated with your objectives and the objectives that you have specified for your research earlier. And after you do these things, the final thing left for you to do on the application system before you submit it is to dedicate time and efforts in setting your project budget. Because I was aware of the fact that definitely today, since, as you saw, there were so many things I wanted to share with you when it comes to this training and preparing the application, I made an agreement with Dr. Khalil. Simply, it was irrational for him to join us and to discuss the part with the budget. So the decision is, and the suggestion is actually for those colleagues who are working on preparing their KFAS grants now or for some future calls, always the best option, and given the fact that definitely KFAS grants and every application is actually unique, I discussed with Dr. Khalil, and the deal is for those colleagues to contact Dr. Khalil and to discuss budget items individually, and he will dedicate time for every application and for any help in these regards. I personally, to be honest, I'm not very familiar with the budgeting, so I wouldn't like to step into this area and explain it, because for every application I do, I tend to have a person who is dealing with the budget, who reads the application and the call and simply provides me with information what is eligible for financing and what not. So as I said, from this perspective, definitely for those who are planning to submit in this cycle or in the future, definitely contact Dr. Khalil, and this would be the solution for the budgeting part. When it comes to the application system, you're required here to provide the elements of your budget and, of course, the justification, not only the items, but also the justification for every item, where you will explain, of course, why this budgetary item is important and needed actually for this application. And finally, as you can see here, you have the part to, okay, these are summary data for the budget, and you have the part to sign your application and to submit it. Before you do so, please make sure that you have prepared everything. Please make sure that you check one more time everything before you submit your application. Please make sure that you have obtained a letter of intent. This is very important, because in this final step, as you can see here, you will be required to provide it. So here, you need to put that document as well. So please make sure that you have it, because as you know, the deadline for this call is March the 31st. Don't wait for the last day to upload, and then you see, oh, I need a letter of intent, and then you're in a problem. Maybe you will be late for the application, not only for this one, but for the others. Simply make sure that you have everything ready before you start submitting it here in the application system. So one more time, when it comes to setting the account under KFAS application system, here is the tutorial provided by KFAS, very detailed one, an excellent one when it comes to registering and accessing it. So it is very easy to use, definitely, when you do it on your own and try it in 5 minutes. Of course, since this is actually the final part of our discussion, I see that I managed, thankfully, to finish it in due time. Please, if you need in the future any kind of assistance from my side when it comes to preparing project applications in general, not only from the scientific perspective, maybe I'm not familiar with the topic that you are covering, but I can definitely help you in terms of those things and small tips and tricks that you can use to make it better, or maybe from the perspective of those supplementary materials, please feel free and be free to contact me at any point. I will be more than happy to assist you in any way when it comes to the project applications, internally, externally, whatever is the case and whatever is the situation. On behalf of the Scientific Research Center and College of Business, for in terms of initiating this whole round of research trainings, and of course on my personal name, I would like to thank you for participating, and I hope that this training will be beneficial, and as I said, it will be available, of course, in our internal archive. If there are any questions or anything that you would like to discuss now at the end, please feel free to do so. Now is the right moment.
Can I have one question or a comment?
Of course.
Yeah, it used to be that there were a couple of levels of grants, and I just want to know if they're still. For example, exploratory grant with 10,000 KD was considerably easier to get than, say, 30,000 KD grant. And what you probably might not have heard the last time, and we're going to talk about it in the technical part, is that it is kind of required to have Kuwaiti on the research team.
Yes.
And so I would strongly advise that, because I was told that it could actually lead to out of scope if you don't have a Kuwaiti on your research team.
Definitely. Thank you, Dr. Andri, for reminding me. I was planning to share this info and actually forgot earlier. When it comes to the budgeting, definitely you are right. And when you read the KFAS call carefully, you will see when it comes to reviewing, for example, those grants up to 10,000 KD, they are reviewed by one reviewer, one evaluator. I don't remember the scale. For example, from 10,000 to 20,000, two reviewers. Over 20,000, there is an external, etc. So definitely the requirements are increasing as with the increase of the budget, and this is an expected thing. So definitely you are right when it comes to that part. When it comes to requirements, formal requirements, such as having young researchers and such as having Kuwaiti researcher on board, this is absolutely true, and thank you one more time for reminding me. What happened in the past few calls, as far as I remember, and as far as I know, again, Dr. Khalil can share more info in these regards. Simply for those project applications in which there was no Kuwaiti researcher on board, they sent the request to the PI asking to include a Kuwaiti researcher on board. So definitely they were not rejected by default. The chance was given to the PI to include the Kuwaiti researcher. But definitely for those who are planning to submit in this cycle or in the future, this is a formal request and formal condition that you need to fulfill in this regards. Is there anything else? As I said, my idea with my participation in this training was more on that scientifically technical part. You know that Dr. Khalil also had a workshop, it was, I think, a month ago, regarding KFAS call and the requirements and everything else. So from that perspective, whenever you are uncertain of certain requirements, please feel free to check it with Dr. Khalil. My part of the story was more associated with this scientifically technical part in preparing it properly and making it better in terms of success of your application. Is there anything else before we officially finish for today? Okay, in this case.
Thanks, Dr. Vladimir.
My pleasure, my dear colleagues. Always available for any kind of help in this regards. Thank you all. See you soon. In different
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Vladimir.
My pleasure.